Dr. John Lieurance is a force of making, at least me, question a lot of things I thought I understood. So he goes into this kind of biohacking supplement realm that is extremely eye-opening when we have the whole context of health. I was struggling with the flu during this interview, so I was having a hard time, but I hope that the message and Dr. Lieurance come through in a way that adds a lot of value. Dr. Lieurance, I have been a fan of yours for a very long time. You've definitely made a massive impact on my life. So the reason that I actually came across your work was around melatonin. When my little boy was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and some of the alternative cancer treatment groups, the Facebook groups, melatonin was talked about. I was like, I really want to understand why high-dose melatonin is being used for cancer. And so that led me to your book and then listening to all kinds of podcasts, and you have just done some incredible stuff. So if you don't care, give us that brief introduction to who you are and how you got into doing some incredible outside of the box things.
Yeah, well, Logan, thank you for that kind introduction. I call it my pain to purpose story, and I think all of us can kind of come up with some level of a challenge in their life that they meet and figure out solutions to, and then they're able to pass that on and support others, contribute to others through a similar journey. And for me, it was with mold and Lyme disease, and it even goes back much further to a child and being involved in the worst water contamination accident in history, which was Camp Lejeune. And if anybody's watching TV these days, they're going to see the commercials with the attorneys looking for people that were living on that base. And I was in utero in my first 2 years of life with that water. And so, my family, my father has cancer, my mother's got crippling arthritis, and my sister's got some health issues as well. And I've never quite been, the healthiest child. I had asthma really bad growing up, lots of allergies, and I was always stuffy and hacking up things. I remember my dad always getting mad, because I'd want to clear my throat or clear that phlegm, especially when I would eat, because it's like, here I am being fed gluten and all this junk food, which is activating histamine. And then you've got the father sitting there at the table that's feeding you that food, that's then upset with you because you're having this massive histamine reaction, right? And this is probably what's going on in most households, especially here in the United States. But I got so sick with the Lyme disease, and I didn't know what it was. And so not only did I have to figure out how to diagnose some of the more difficult conditions, because I was getting answers that really I wasn't okay with. I'm like, doctor, I am sick. So I'm like the doctor, right? I have a practice where people are flying in and I'm doing, holistic medicine, but then all of a sudden I get so sick and I just can't figure out what's wrong with me. And I'm going to, standard allopathic doctors. I thought I had, some sort of arthropathy, right? And I went to a rheumatologist to try and get answers. And he diagnosed me with ankylosing spondylitis. And that's where I kind of really understood that just about all of these arthropathies, including the autoimmune ones, they're all being fed by chronic infection and chronic toxicity, because that's what was happening with me. So when I see these cases coming through the front door, I know the labs to do. And trust me, the rheumatologists, they don't know what labs to do. They're just simply doing a standard antibody test that's saying, yes, your body is pissed off and it's starting to mount an immune response to something. But the immune system gets dysregulated for a reason. All disease happens for a reason. Cancer happens for a reason. All of these reasons, we get pain in the body and and inflammation, and there's a reason. There's damage in the tissues, right? So toxins and infections are pretty much at the core of most chronic diseases, not necessarily all the orthopedic diseases, although they make them worse. But a
Sure.
lot of people get confused with orthopedic conditions just the same that they do with everything else. That I've got inflammation in my knee, so let me get a steroid shot or an anti-inflammatory, and it fixed my problem, but it only lasted for so long. So even that vocabulary, like, okay, how did that fix the problem? In fact, you're covering it up. It's like painting over rust. But then you go to a doctor like us and you come in with a knee pain, and we take high definition ultrasound. We look into that knee and we see there's actually tears in the meniscus. And then we may take your blood and spin it down and actually do what your body would want to do naturally, the way God made us, and place a scaffold and new cells and tissues to heal that. But parts of our body, we have an adaptation ability, right? And that comes from a damaged meniscus to someone that gets too much, a farmer that gets too much pesticides and then
Yeah.
develops Parkinson's or even cancer, right?
Yeah.
And these are very well documented that this happens. But some people can tolerate more of those toxins, just like some people can tolerate a bigger tear, because there's genetics involved and there's lifestyle things and there's nutritional. And so there's statuses, and then there's the ability, when you really look at the individual and their ability to compensate for a stressor or an injury, it's the amount of life force which comes from the mitochondria, which then I think is really why you brought me on the podcast, because we want to kind of dive around. That is where you start getting the practitioner and the doctors that are really looking under the hood at the deepest of deepest sources, upstream sources,
Yeah.
root causes of most diseases.
And that seems to be where the core of the issue is, that we're not really paying attention to, for whatever reason. And so, before we get too deep into that, can you give me a brief overview of Lyme? Because I am running into that as a much more common thing, and it's almost kind of like shoved aside, like it's not a big deal. But there's been some people that have had cancer and Lyme, and they would say the Lyme is probably worse in certain instances. So, do you care to just kind of explain what is Lyme?
Well, just imagine something that is so toxic to your immune system that then your immune system is so low that you become a walking soup of all kinds of infections. And the level of inflammation that occurs from all that microbial overgrowth, right? And so it's not just the Lyme that's the problem. It's the fact that the Lyme gets so deep in the body, and the body has a hard time finding it and fighting it because of those spirochetes bore deep into the tissues. And so, Lyme can cause some very, very crippling arthritis type joint pain. And it really likes fibrocartilage, right? And so we have a lot of fibrocartilage around our ribs. We have fibrocartilage on our sternoclavicular joint, like right around where it attaches to the manubrium. And that's where it really hit me. The SI joints, in the lower lumbar, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people are going to be confused thinking, oh, it's in my lower spine, when in fact it's really deep in the SIs because there's so much fibrocartilage in there. Meniscus is in the knee, labrum in the hips, labrum in the shoulders. These are the areas that tend to be where they show up. And in fact, when patients present, often we can palpate some of these spots and then kind of have a bit of a clue that maybe Lyme might be the problem. But then, that's really going to be a lot of local pain and maybe some fatigue. But when you start getting into some of the biggest culprits, which are Epstein-Barr virus, HHV6, and cytomegalovirus, those are the viruses that really take advantage. And that's why we like to test all three of those. And then the way that we're able to test the immune system to see the immune status is a test called CD57, and that's available through LabCorp. So I think any doctor working somebody up with Lyme also needs to look at viral titers. They need to look at different inflammatory markers like um, TGF beta 1 and MMP9, but then also looking what's the status of the immune system. What's nice about CD57, for those that might be curious, maybe I've got Lyme, my doctor says I do, or my doctor says I don't. You can get this test on your own if your doctor won't order it. And if you've got a low CD57, you can do something for a couple of months and immediately test that and see, is your immune system coming back on board? And so that's why we like that marker. And if it's below 100, then that's kind of a big deal. The norms are from 60 up, right? They want it to be above 60, but we feel that anything above 100 is really, below 100 is significant.
Okay. So is Lyme one of the biggest reasons that you got into like the methylene blue or the melatonin or why is that an important part of your protocol?
Yeah, well, they were tools I had late in my journey. And methylene blue has been quite late. I would say that I would be considered kind of cured by the time methylene blue really came on board, but I've really enjoyed methylene blue as a supplement personally for um, just overall vitality, mood, endurance. And then I've had COVID a couple of times where I've used methylene blue. The first time was just crazy rough for me. I think it almost killed me, really. And I didn't have methylene blue on board, and I wish I did. But I've been able to treat a lot of people with COVID with a combination of methylene blue, silver, and also light, because methylene blue is what's called photodynamic, because it's a very specific blue shade. And because what it's doing is it's absorbing the red and it's reflecting the blue. And so certain substances have a very narrow range in the nanometers, right? So when you look at light, a very small amount of it is visual, right? And so within that visual spectrum, 660 nanometers is a very red color. And that color, the photons, which are basically units and packets of energy, are absorbed into the methylene blue. And because our mitochondria can use both electrons, which is matter, it's like real things, and then non-matter, right? So a photon is essentially nothing, which is wild, right?
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard to grasp, isn't it?
It's light, so it's photons, it's units and packets of energy. And when you start to really look at quantum physics, like life can, the inherent isness of things can either be a wave or a particle. And so our mitochondria can make energy from either a wave or a particle, either way. And when you think about it, this is the way that this is what is true for the smallest and the smallest of things. So I'm glad we were built that way, right? So we can take light and actually make energy. There's people that are what do they call them? They don't eat or drink. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but
Like
they
sun
just
eaters or light eaters or something like that.
yeah, yeah.
And
So
so,
there's
can you help me understand?
breatharians.
Yeah,
Yeah.
breatharian. Yes, that's what Sarah Pugh had told me. Oh, so where where does this come into with hydrogen? And so I've really been trying to wrap my brain around this with, say, the electron transport chain. It's a proton and electron. So hydrogen. So where does that parallel what you just said?
Well, the end result of making energy is H2O, right? And so it's two hydrogens and an oxygen, right? So in order to get through to that completion, you need twice as many hydrogens as oxygens, right? So there's a need for hydrogen. And when you put excessive hydrogen into a system, there's been some really good research on how it can be really beneficial for mitochondrial function. and even for neuroprotection and a variety of different kind of aspects of health and wellness. And that's why, I did this morning. I've got these like tiny little pills that I drop in water, and it kind of fizzles,
Yeah.
and it puts hydrogen in with the water. And then you can buy different devices. You can breathe hydrogen air. And so, you can also push more oxygen into that system and get an enhanced mitochondrial. But if you're rate limiting, and that's kind of where NAD works too. NAD stands for nicotinamide mononucleotide. And so these are rate limiting substances. CoQ10 could be a rate limiting substance, magnesium, right? So these different substances, oftentimes we don't have a lot of these in our diet. If we're not supplementing with them, then there's going to be a shortage of energy, and if you were to add one of those things back in, there'll be a level of mitochondrial boost that you'll get.
So, Dr. Lawrence, the mitochondrial production of energy, that can be like dirty, right? Like part of it is like that's the need for the cell or the mitochondria to produce melatonin. Can you explain that process on like where the natural melatonin comes into play with the energy production that you just you laid out?
Yeah. So when we don't have any stressors, we don't really need melatonin. This was the original research they did with rodents, and their end of their study was, they didn't really feel like melatonin really showed to be of much benefit for different, groups of mice or rats. But they were, during these studies, the rodents were basically like as if they were living at the Ritz-Carlton, because the laws for these laboratory animals is very strict, and so they can't really, they're eating very good food, they're able to sleep, and their cages are cleaned and all these things. But there is a way to stress these animals where they put them in a tube. And you can imagine if you were shoved into a tube, like a dark tube, and you're like stuck there for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
That's the way that they were stressing these mice. And then they were comparing the mice that were given melatonin versus the mice that were not given melatonin. They find a lot of the diseases associated with modern, civilization, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune conditions, lifespan, all these things were much higher with the mice that were getting stressed that didn't have the melatonin. And so this has sparked a huge amount of research into why that is. And I think you'd be seeing melatonin very well, presented on TV and so forth, but there's no patent. It's not patentable because it's a natural molecule. And so because of that, we don't really hear about the amazing story with melatonin. But since we basically live in such a stressful life and world, we are like that rodent that is in that tube, right? And so what that means is that when we have an excessive need to adapt, so our need to adapt to that stressor requires energy. And when we are not able to produce an adequate amount of energy, then we'll suffer the consequences of that stressor. And so what melatonin does is it allows the mitochondria to work at a higher rate. It's able to basically, like if you had an engine and you had to really push that engine a little bit further, and you're really revving that energy, right? And it's got to work a lot harder. Well, you might want to have cleaner gas, right? You want to have a better cooling system. You want to make sure that oil gets changed. There's certain things that are important for an engine in order for an engine to perform at a much higher level. And there's different circumstances, but when you look at the cooling mechanism, that would be like comparing the melatonin, because when this engine or this mitochondria, and it's really like an engine because it's like, 100,000 RPMs per second. Like that's this little rotor in it. It's tiny. This tiny little rotor is going like 90,000 RPMs a second, if you can imagine that. And so that can go much harder if you can cool it down. And that's why melatonin's the master antioxidant. It's cooling. It's cooling the oxidation, which is happening from the production of the energy. So what they found is that that's naturally there. And as we're younger, we produce a lot of natural melatonin in the mitochondria so we can endure more stressors without shutting down. Because what happens is if we don't endure that, if we can't adapt, then the entire system just collapses and it shuts down, leaving us with a major deficit of energy. That's where disease jumps in. So that's where the disease happens, is that when we can't adapt, right? You have a
Mm-hmm.
breakdown in the energy. And then everybody's got different sets of genes. And so disease is going to present itself in a unique set and circumstance with all of us because we can't adapt to our environment. And it's the environment that's going to activate the gene expression. They call that um, um, oh man, I'm having a brain fart. Perigenet? No, not perigenetics.
I'm drawing a blank too. I
Yeah.
want to say
Anyway, but so
epigenetics.
it's really about the expression and activation of the genes, not the genes themselves. It'd be like a card game, right? It's like the cards you get dealt is your genes, but how you play the game is really the epigenetics. I'm sorry, epigenetics.
The epigenetics of it. So if when you were talking about the way they stressed the rodents, the effects of stress, if they present themselves in all these different chronic diseases, it's pretty safe to say that stress causes chronic disease, right? Like, in long-term stress creates chronic disease. So what in your estimation is that mechanism? What is stress doing to us that is causing these things to happen? The heart disease, the diabetes, do you have a simplified way of throwing that out there?
Well, I think first of all, we need to like kind of like define like what stressors we're talking about. Because when I say stress, I think a lot of people out there thinking, I argue with my wife last night. Yep, I know I need to like reduce my stress and start getting along with her more. Well, there's mental, emotional stress, but then there's physical, chemical, electromagnetic, microbial. All of these stresses are things that we need to think about. So the sun can be a stress, right? We go out and get too much sun, we get sunburned. That stress shows up with a sunburn, right? So we have a burning of the skin, and then we need to adapt to that. Some people can adapt really, really well. If you take a lot of melatonin, I never burn. I can go out in the sun all day long. And trust me, before I started taking higher doses of melatonin, I would burn to a crisp. And and that's actually really nice. So it's an outward expression that's showing me how much more resilient my cells and tissues are with melatonin, right? So the most common stressor that is driving, I would offer, most diseases is stressors related to what I call the doorways of the body. And this falls within chemical, microbial, right? So
Mm-hmm.
toxic stress. So our nose, our mouth, and our colon are areas that we have an entry of. We're interacting with the environment, right? So we have microbes that are natural in all of these areas, and there's a balance between good and bad. And what happens if we don't practice proper hygiene, then these areas, these doorways, become pockets um, of like a swamp, right? You're either a swamp or a river. So these areas become more like a swamp, more microbial overgrowth. And basically, what those microbes excrete is something called an endotoxin. And if you really want to take an interesting rabbit hole, you can start looking at endotoxins and looking at just about all diseases. And they found that most diseases have some connection with an over production of endotoxins in the body. So that's why we have systems related to taking care of your doorways, like the glutastat nasal spray that Mitozen makes. Of course, you got to go to the .club. It's a lot of the products are just available to club members, and It's $10 lifetime membership fee, but you get some really powerful, unique, targeted types of products that are also used by a lot of holistic practitioners. But this is also available to the public. But this spray has silver, it has N-acetylcysteine, glutathione, and like the secret sauce are these emulsified sage, oregano, clove, bay leaf, linalool, which is from lavender, germinal. I mean, these are for really powerful terpenes and essential oils, and you spray it in the nose, right? And it's a bit spicy, but it really works on, you do this regularly for I like a 30-day sinus protocol that a lot of my patients will do when they first start seeing me, but then even once a day as a maintenance. And then I like essential oils for the mouth as well. We have a product that I formulated called Boca Zen, which is, a number of different essential oils that you use orally, right? The gut is a little bit different, and it's a much more expansive. Although, kind of circling back to the mouth, especially people that are facing cancer, any serious diseases, you might look at pockets in the jaw, right? And if you've had your wisdom teeth removed, you want to look at, cavitations and getting something called a cone beam, because you can have pockets of, infection within this doorway that could be in the bone or the teeth, right? Root canals, those teeth can often be very toxic, and it's wise to maybe just have them removed. Colon wise, we're a big fan of yogurt, of making yogurt. And I've got a really good yogurt recipe. You think people would be interested in
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. I can add it.
I can share that with you.
Okay.
And making your own yogurt's actually really easy, and unfortunately most companies making probiotics or yogurts, they don't really allow them to ferment long enough to really get the really, really high density of probiotics.
With, we've just actually kind of taken a deep dive on raw milk lately, with just the legislations, the kind of the controversy around it, and so like making yogurt has been something I'm really interested in. So, are you taking raw milk? Or are you starting with how are you starting to make your own yogurt?
Yeah, so you could do that. You could take raw milk and honey, and then you want something to kind of give it some firmness. Something like apple pectin is my favorite,
Mm,
right? But there's also different gelatins that you can use. Inulin is actually a really good kind of prebiotic to add in there. You can buy inulin on Amazon,
mm-hmm.
and you can take a couple of scoops of that and put it in. I prefer coconut based. A lot of people are going to be sensitive to dairy, and I wouldn't recommend anybody with cancer doing any casein or dairy at all, even raw milk. That's just my own personal, if they want to kind of dive into that, there's a book called The China Study,
Mm-hmm.
which really looked at diet and the cancer genes and what was really turning on the cancer genes. And they found that the casein in dairy was the most activating to that system. So they really looked at like more of a raw food, like animal meat was also a powerful activator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that has been a topic as we've dove in a lot of, I've had a lot of the carnivore guys on and going, back and forth of that. And, recently, Naisha Winters, I don't know if you're familiar with her. She is, doing some incredible work around the cancer. And then she's got some, it kind of reminds me of you with these nuances of some things that, we have known for a long time, or maybe we're now figuring out. But where let's talk about the applying melatonin and methylene blue, if they even remotely have any efficacy around cancer, because because of you, I have been communicating with Russell Ryder over the last year or two, and then Gonzalez Lima with the methylene blue, and he seems to think, and he's got a personal story going on there, but the methylene blue really, it doesn't have anything to do with cancer. It's not going to benefit, which I don't know that I believe that, but I mean, he is the man when it comes to methylene blue, I guess. So what are your thoughts around cancer and melatonin and methylene blue?
Well, actually, there's been some evidence that methylene blue has an application against cancer, and if you look at you know some of the work that we're doing, this would be, I think, really applicable to really any man over the age of 40, is the prostate, right? What's the
Yeah.
most common cancer in men over the age of 40 is prostate cancer, right? And so what we found is through testing their semen. So we have a semen test that, in fact, this might be something that we might want to offer your people as well, as if they want to get their semen tested. And so basically we get this report back that shows which microbes are in their fluid. So the
Oh,
prostate
really?
is going to excrete the fluid that then is going to be collected and sent into the lab, and they even tell us like which antibiotics work against it. But the problem is you can't take oral antibiotics and get to the prostate because it's like a separate capsule. It's very protected from your general circulation. And so we accumulate these infections, and then they cause benign prostatic hypertrophy, a swelling of that prostate. And that's the initial response to that infection, right? It's a swelling. And it's mostly, you get like inducible nitric oxide, which is the bad nitric oxide just causing all that swelling. And that can eventually lead to some difficulty with urination and things like that. And then if it's there long enough, cancer is the end result of just a stress over a long period of time. And so it's very clear in research that toxins and infections cause cancer, right? I mean, they look at even like Epstein-Barr, a lot of viruses are associated with various types of cancers, and also different toxins. That's what they use in labs oftentimes to activate cancer in these
Yeah.
these labs. And so when you look at methylene blue, the reason that I'm bringing this up kind of during our conversation about methylene blue is we are pioneering a procedure where we inject methylene blue under ultrasound into the prostate. We do a series of 3, and we also add in a custom combination of antibiotics that we find based on the test. And then we also use ozone, which ozone is also very good for microbes and cancer. And then we also draw the patient's blood, and we put all of their immune cells in with it. So it's really a really amazing. We call it Prosta Blue Zone, and people can go to advancedrejuvenation.us, and they can see us actually performing this procedure and all the information about it. They want to order a semen test. I mean, if you're having prostate issues, I mean, this is really treating the root cause, right? And it's better to get it earlier because they're actually saying it's just normal for us all to get cancer, and hopefully we outlive the prostate cancer and we die from something else.
No.
That's kind of a twisted way of looking at it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, our healthcare model doesn't really want to look at root cause. They want to focus their attention on treating the symptoms and the downstream because it's much more profitable. And this is one of the reasons that Robert Kennedy is, he's talking a lot about this. And
Mm-hmm.
I know some people might be turned off by him because they haven't really looked at a lot of what he has to say. But from my perspective, he makes a lot of sense, and he's really coming at this whole thing from a non-monetary standpoint, and what would be best for the people and for our healthcare models and for our culture in general. And so this doesn't necessarily mean it's the most profitable way to go, right? And so it would be much more profitable to treat prostate cancer than to eradicate an infection 20 years before, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that the system is just so unbelievably broken. Prevention, there's just not a whole lot of money in it. But this is what motivates me. It's like, I don't want to see anybody else go through the cancer, right? Like, I don't want to see anybody else's 5-year-old go through what my baby had to go through. And so, like, I don't have any sort of agenda. I simply am trying to find things that work and apply them and share as we talk to pioneers. And I consider you, one of the premier pioneers that has
Mm,
opened my
yeah.
eyes to the methylene blue. I think that's been phenomenal, and I think that's something we need to dive in a little bit more on, like how or why or where at least we need to go to get the resources to apply it accurately, and the
Mm,
melatonin. I think those
yeah.
two things have so much controversy, and like so I've got the flu right now. Like I'm just trying to push through. I should
Okay.
have had your nose spray and everything else, but man,
Yeah.
I think it's the stress, it's the lack of sleep. You know, I got 4 kids, two
Uh-huh.
businesses, trying to just push through, and so um, I'm not 100% on my game today, but I think what your message is so important for, me. I want to see some entrepreneurs come out and game change in their communities and build it out, and how we can serve the way you've done it. So if if you will, just go into why is entrepreneurship like what you've done, like you are serving people through entrepreneurship in a way that not a lot of other medical professionals have, and then the tools in which you've used to do that. Just go into kind of your philosophy with entrepreneurship, and then the tools that you've built your business around.
Yeah, interesting. Well, initially you had suggested we kind of get into how to apply, methylene blue and melatonin, and I'd hate to, get through this podcast and not give that
Absolutely.
information. So it's okay with you. We'll start there.
Absolutely.
Um, a lot of people have a fear of taking higher doses of melatonin because they think that there's going to be some sort of a negative feedback loop. Like if you take it, you're going to stop your own production. And that just simply doesn't exist. There's also no negative impact to our hormones or our puberty. There's some misconceptions on that based on seasonally breeding hamsters,
The
right? So that we
Siberian
don't.
hamster study.
Yeah, if you listen to Andrew Huberman, you'll run for the door away from melatonin, which is crazy because you look at the vast amount of research on so many different diseases, and um, the majority of Americans have some disease going on, right? So you've got one of the number one podcasters that's down on, I think, one of the safest supplements that would support a lot of people through a lot of these different disease situations, such as cancer, autoimmune diseases, uh, um, degenerative neurologic diseases, diabetes. Just the list goes on. I liver, gut. I wrote a chapter in just about all of them, and I think there's like 14 chapters in the book. But so you can take a lot of melatonin, it won't interfere with your own production. And when you take a larger amount, meaning we're talking in the hundreds of milligrams, you can start spilling over into this benefit into the gut and the microbiome, into the skin, into the rest of your body. And so that's why my book is called Beyond Sleep, because we're talking about melatonin as it relates to protecting us from all of these stressors. And this is something that happens in every cell. So the amount of melatonin produced by the body compared to the amount of melatonin produced by the pineal. So then you have researchers saying you should take this much melatonin that are just myopically looking at the tiny amount that the pineal makes, and to try and match that, they're not looking at all of the cells and tissues throughout the body. So we're not even having the same conversation. But I think these days we need that extra support. And I don't see any negatives. They've done lots of studies and they've shown that there's no toxicity to melatonin. So you can take a lot, you can take every day for many, many years, for your entire life. You can bathe in melatonin. You can sprinkle melatonin all over your food. You can take a whole lot of it, and you don't need to worry about this having an effect on you. And what's interesting is you have people eating GMO food and pesticide ridden food. And I
Yeah.
mean, things that are known to be toxic, and they're wasting their time talking about how dangerous melatonin is,
Yeah.
right? But
Let me tie that
so
in
so
together with the entrepreneurial thing real quick. How can we know that the production, the manufacturing of, say, supplemental melatonin is appropriate, is healthy, is kosher. I mean kosher as in just good for us. But how, and it, kind of setting you up there for the entrepreneurship with Mitozen.
Okay, so I think I'm getting confused with the word entrepreneurship. What exactly are you looking for? Is like how I'm running my business, or
No, not necessarily. Like the entrepreneurship being providing a service, right? Providing something that serves other people. And then you've been able to do that with certain ways, right? Like utilizing
yeah?
uh, appropriate supplements that are made right. And how do you know that? How do you go through this process of producing like the upper echelon of supplements? Just that you've
Well,
used helping people to create a business to do more.
okay, I think I understand. So for me, um, it's this pain to purpose story. So I had a problem, and my I'm very sensitive, and I think that's basically stemmed from the Camp Lejeune exposure, right? So I've got this like super sensitive system, and so working to kind of navigate being in this sensitive physical body, I've been working with toying around and playing with things that work and don't work. And so with melatonin, I was looking at like taking it orally versus taking it in a suppository rectally, different types of liposomal combinations. And so that's where it kind of spurred our Sandman line of products, which range from a slow release bar to a liposomal liquid that you take orally. And then the best delivery is rectally, where you take a suppository. And so that slow releases. So it's really looking at kind of falling back on, the 30 years of experience I have in naturopathic medicine and chiropractic medicine, just the creative nature, and then in the curious nature of my mind, and then the need and the utility behind some of these natural solutions. And the same thing happened with methylene blue. As soon as I get a hold of it, I also was like listening to a bunch of stuff with Frank Gonzalez Lima, and he was talking about the different delivery, and he started saying that you don't want to do it in a sublingual. And I noticed the most popular product out there was this troche, and people's mouths were blue, and it was a very small amount. So I started playing with higher doses of it and noticed that for me and my patients, we did much better with between like 40, 45 milligrams to 90, or even close to 200 milligrams a day. And I couldn't see anything in the market that was meeting those specs, right? And so then I wanted to create something that really just exclusively released in the stomach without turning the mouth blue. And that's where I came up with a cocoa butter suspension, right? And this is where you can take it, throw it in the back of your throat, and then drink something, and your mouth won't turn blue, and it will just fully absorb in the stomach, And so then, I think, from an entrepreneurship, it's really nice to be able to come up with unique ideas and niches. And a lot of people will just kind of look around and just find something to copy, something. Maybe somebody's good at marketing and they find a good idea and they're just better at marketing. They can make a lot of money that way. Or you have to be super creative and you have to be able to like pave your own way. And that's kind of what Mitozen has done, is just really been able to really do both. I think
Yeah.
market really well, get the word out, present it in ways that people understand, using protocols. And that's worked really well for us.
Your products are amazing. I've used the vast majority of them. I hate that you've had to go behind a paywall just based off of the join the club thing. But honestly, you know what? We're having to do the same thing around food because it's illegal to have certain foods, and somehow as Americans, we can't decide what we're going to eat, which is mind blowing. But Mitozen and your work is incredible. I think you've helped more people than you will ever know, my friend. And you've definitely opened my eyes and led me down many, many, many rabbit trails. And I sincerely mean it when I say you have influenced me probably more than about anybody else. There's a few of you mavericks out there that I owe a lot to, but I just want to thank you for your work. Thank you for the time to sit down and talk to me and share your experience. I sincerely apologize for just feeling like hammered poop at the moment, but
Well,
thank you.
Logan, I appreciate that, and that really warms my heart. And I hope that I can continue to inspire you and other people with, walking my walk. I always say, watch my feet, not my mouth, but I got a lot to say too.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you, you telling me that, and I do appreciate, and I don't take that lightly.
Thank you for joining us on Sowing Prosperity. Be sure to follow along across the social media platforms, including YouTube, and be sure to go to sowingprosperity.com.